My mother handed me a speech while two workers bolted her name over mine. The new brass plaque read, "The Patricia Mercer Community Garden." I had designed that garden, raised the first volunteers, and spent 7 years bringing it to life. Mom tapped the pages against my wrist and smiled. "Try not to make this about you, Nicole." The dedication was 4 days away. She expected me to thank her for taking credit for my work in front of the whole city. What she did not know was that I still had the first plan, drawn in green pencil, with the promise she had made written in the margin. Before I tell you what happened at that podium, tell me this. Would you keep the piece if the price was your own name? I thought I would. That was my mistake. My name is Nicole Mercer. I am 37 years old, and I am a landscape architect in Cedar Falls, Iowa. I know how to read a slope, manage storm water, and make stubborn soil support new roots. For most of my life, I was much worse at recognizing when someone I loved was slowly removing me from my own story. The garden began as an empty lot on Linden Street. It sat behind the old branch library and across from a row of small brick apartments. The grocery store nearby had closed years earlier. The lot collected broken glass, tall weeds, and shopping carts with one bad wheel. Children cut through it on the way to school. Their parents told them not to. Every spring, someone called the city. Every summer, the weeds came back taller. I noticed the lot because I drove past it on my way to work. At the time, I was a junior designer at a firm called Northline Studio. We designed hospital courtyards, office parks, and expensive apartment roofs. I liked the work. I did not always like who could afford it. One rainy afternoon, I stopped at the library to return a book. A woman named Rosa Alvarez was outside pulling trash from the fence with kitchen tongs. She lived across the street. I asked why she was doing it alone. "Because everyone keeps waiting for someone official," she said. Then she looked at my work boots. "Are you official?" I laughed. I told her I was only an architect with a trash bag. We filled 3 bags before the rain got serious. Rosa pointed toward the south fence. She said tomatoes would get good sun there. I could already see raised beds, a shaded table, and a path wide enough for wheelchairs. By the time I drove home, I had the whole lot rearranged in my head. That night, I rolled brown paper across my kitchen table. I used a green drafting pencil because it was the only one still sharp. I drew 12 garden beds, a tool shed, 2 rain barrels, and a small circle for fruit trees. I marked the library wall, the alley, and the fire lane. In the lower corner, I wrote a name, Linden Street Community Garden. Under that, I wrote, "Designed with the neighborhood by Nicole Mercer." It was not a vanity line. It was a reminder that the plan belonged to the people who would build it. My mother saw the drawing 2 days later. Patricia Mercer had come over with a casserole and a list of errands she thought I should run. She was 62 then. She wore pearl earrings to the hardware store and never entered a room without knowing who chaired the committee. For 20 years, she had run a small charity called the Mercer Civic Circle. It funded school coats, library events, and holiday food baskets. Nothing large, nothing careless. Mom treated every donated dollar like a witness. She stood over my kitchen table and studied the plan. "This is ambitious," she said. "In my family, ambitious could mean impressive. It could also mean embarrassing." I asked which one she meant. She ignored the question. Instead, she traced the proposed path with one polished fingernail. "Who is paying for all this?" I said, "Nobody yet. I plan to ask the city about the lot, then build a volunteer group." Mom sighed in the careful way she used. When she believed, I had confused enthusiasm with adulthood. "You have a full-time job," she said. "People love ideas until someone needs insurance." She was not wrong. That was how my mother won arguments. She began with the practical part, and then she slipped her judgment behind it. I told her I knew the project might fail. I also told her I wanted to try. She looked at the title block again. Her eyes stopped on my name. "Mercer is on there twice," she said. "That seems a little much." I erased nothing. The next week, I met with the city parks coordinator, Evan Brooks. Evan was 43, patient, and impossible to impress with a pretty sketch. He cared about drainage, soil tests, and whether volunteers would still show up after the first season. He told me the city could consider a 1-year pilot land use agreement. We would need a recognized nonprofit to hold the agreement and receive donations. My volunteer group did not exist yet. My mother's charity did. The Mercer Civic Circle worked from 2 rooms above a pharmacy. Mom had framed newspaper clippings on every wall. In most of them, she stood beside someone holding an oversized check. She listened while I explained the land agreement. Then she asked 12 questions about liability, donations, and bookkeeping. I answered 11. The last one was simple. Who gets final approval? I said the charity would handle money, but the garden committee would make design and program decisions. She leaned back. So I carry the risk, but strangers make the choices? She asked. I said the neighbors were not strangers. They were the project. Mom looked at me for several seconds. Then she surprised me. She opened a drawer, took out her fountain pen, and signed a letter of support. 1 year, she said. We review everything after 1 year. Relief made me careless. I hugged her before I read the entire letter. At the bottom, she had written a sentence by hand. Nicole remains project designer and community lead. I asked her to initial that line. She did. Then she smiled like I had wounded her. You think your own mother would take credit for your little garden? I felt ashamed at once. That reaction was older than the project. Mom could make a reasonable boundary sound like an accusation. I apologized. She patted my hand and said, "There, now we both feel better." I should have noticed that only one of us had actually received protection. The first year was mud, meetings, and rejection. The city tested the soil. We needed clean fill in 2 sections. A local contractor donated gravel but not labor. The library let us use its meeting room on Tuesday nights. Some weeks, 12 people came. Some weeks, only Rosa and I showed up. I carried the green pencil plan in a cardboard tube. We unrolled it on folding tables until the corners softened and the paper smelled like coffee. The neighborhood changed the design before we broke ground. Mr. Webb wanted taller beds because his knees hurt. A group of teenagers asked for a mural wall. Rosa insisted on herbs near the sidewalk so anyone could take a little without opening the gate. I revised the plan after every meeting. The title stayed the same. So did the line beneath it, designed with the neighborhood by Nicole Mercer. Each time I rolled the paper, my mother's initials appeared in the lower margin beside her promise. Mom came to the 4th meeting wearing a navy blazer. She brought cookies in clear plastic boxes and a stack of donation forms with the Civic Circle logo. People liked her. She remembered names, asked about grandchildren, and turned vague offers into exact commitments. By the end of the night, a hardware store had promised lumber. A bank had offered a small grant. I watched her work and felt grateful. This was the version of my mother that made people believe a difficult thing could become orderly. After the meeting, she asked why her charity's logo was not on my plan. I said the plan was a design document, not a fundraiser. She smiled. Details matter only when they belong to you. I thought she was teasing. I added the logo to the donor page, not the plan. She did not mention it again. For a while, that felt like compromise. Later, I understood it was the first time she tested whether I would move my name so hers could take up more room. We received city approval in early spring. The land use agreement named the Mercer Civic Circle as fiscal sponsor. It named me as project designer and site coordinator. Evan read both lines aloud before anyone signed. Mom nodded. I signed as project lead. She signed for the charity. Rosa signed as neighborhood representative. Then Evan handed me a copy with a blue city seal. I put it in the same tube as the first plan. I thought that meant the truth was safe. The first workday drew 80 volunteers. Children painted stones. Retired carpenters built frames. College students moved soil until their arms gave out. My mother stood near the gate with a clipboard and a photographer. She had arranged matching green shirts for the Civic Circle board. I wore an old gray shirt because I was inside a trench when the boxes arrived. When the newspaper photographer asked who had started the project, Mom pointed toward me. "My daughter drew it," she said. Northline Studio gave me Fridays off for the summer. I worked 4 long days, then spent 3 at the garden. I marked bed corners, solved drainage problems, and taught volunteers how to set pavers. Rosa kept a cooler under the library steps. Evan checked our work without hovering. Mom arrived at noon with donors. She walked them along the finished paths and repeated phrases from my planning notes. Universal access, she would say, shared harvest, neighborhood stewardship. Her voice made the ideas sound like products she had ordered. One Friday, I heard her tell a donor, "I wanted a place where dignity could grow." That sentence was mine. I had written it in the grant narrative at 2 in the morning. The donor touched Mom's arm and said it was beautiful. I waited for her to say my daughter wrote that. She did not. I could have corrected her. Instead, I pushed a wheelbarrow past them and pretended I had not heard. I wanted the garden more than I wanted the sentence. That choice seemed harmless. It saved an awkward moment. It also taught my mother something important. I would surrender small pieces of authorship if she tied them to the project's survival. She never demanded the whole thing at once. Patricia Mercer was too smart for that. She took a phrase, then an introduction, then a photograph. Each time, she left enough of me visible that I could call my discomfort ungrateful. By September, the first beds were full. We harvested beans, kale, peppers, and more zucchini than anyone wanted. The library hosted a cooking table on Saturdays. Children who used to cut through the weeds now argued over watering cans. The city renewed our agreement for another year. At the neighborhood picnic, Rosa handed me a paper plate with a slice of cake. "You built what you drew," she said. I looked across the lot and believed her. My mother climbed onto a small platform near the shed. She had not told me there would be speeches. She thanked the city, the donors, and the Civic Circle board. Then she thanked our talented volunteers, including my daughter Nicole, who helped with the design. Helped with the design. The words landed softly. That made them worse. I was standing beside the 12 beds I had measured, revised, and supervised, yet one small verb had turned me into an assistant. Rosa whispered, "Are you going to let that stand?" I said it was not the day for a fight. Mom was still speaking. She announced that the Civic Circle would seek a larger grant for permanent improvements. People applauded. I clapped too. That night, I replayed her sentence while washing dirt from my hands. I could hear how easily it would enter the official version. Patricia led. Nicole helped. The garden grew. History liked simple sentences, even when they were false. I called Mom the next morning. I kept my voice calm. I reminded her that I was the project designer and community lead. She said of course I was. I asked why she had described me as helping. She laughed once. "Nicole, nobody was taking attendance on the verbs." I said I was. Her tone changed. "Then you care more about applause than I thought." I tried to explain that credit was not applause, it was responsibility. She ended the call by saying she had a grant deadline. 2 days later, she emailed an apology. It was 3 sentences long. She said she was sorry that I had felt overlooked. She also said public projects required a team spirit. Then she attached the new grant draft and asked me to review the planting budget. I opened the document. The first page said, "Founded by Patricia Mercer through the Mercer Civic Circle." My name appeared on page 6 under technical support. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then I called her office. Her assistant said Mom was in meetings. I drove there with the green pencil plan under my arm. Patricia was alone when I arrived. She did not look surprised. I set the draft on her desk and asked her to correct it. She folded her hands. "The funder wants one accountable founder," she said. I pointed to the city agreement. It already named an accountable organization and a project lead. Mom slid the draft back toward me. The civic circle has the history, the bank account, and the liability. I said the garden had started before her charity joined. She nodded as if indulging a child. An idea is not a project. I lifted the cardboard tube. This was a project before you signed anything. Her eyes moved to the tube. For the first time, I saw irritation instead of concern. And without me, she said, it would still be paper. That was the first honest sentence she gave me. I asked whether she believed processing checks made her the founder. She said leadership meant making things possible. I reminded her of the handwritten line she had initialed. Nicole remains project designer and community lead. Mom looked away. That was before the scope changed. Nothing in our agreement said my role expired when the garden became successful. She knew that. I knew that. Still, I had no desire to destroy the grant. We made a bargain. She would change founder to sponsor. My name would move to the first page as project designer and site lead. In return, I would finish the permanent improvement plan before the deadline. We shook hands across her desk. I left with the draft. 3 hours later, a revised copy arrived. The wording had changed. It now read, "The Mercer Civic Circle founded the garden under the leadership of Patricia Mercer." My name moved to page 3. I should have refused to work. Instead, I marked the document and sent it back. That was my second mistake. I treated a boundary violation like a copy edit. Mom learned that every time she moved the line, I would move it halfway back and keep working. The grant was worth $180,000. It would add a greenhouse, accessible beds, and a covered teaching area. I could picture all of it. She could too. Evan noticed the wording during his city review. He called me and asked who had founded the garden. I said I had started it with Rosa and the neighborhood. He was quiet. Then he asked why the application said otherwise. I gave him the kind of answer people give when they are protecting someone who is hurting them. It is a branding issue. Evan said branding became a record once public money was involved. He offered to pause the application. I told him not to. The deadline was that afternoon. If we missed it, the garden would wait another year. Evan said, "Nicole, you can protect the project without disappearing from it." I said I would handle my mother. I believed that because the alternative was admitting I had already failed to handle her. He documented my role in the city's review notes. Then he submitted the application. I heard the final click over the phone. We won the grant in January. My mother called before the city did. She was crying, real tears, I think. She said the garden would finally become permanent. For a few minutes, we were simply happy. We talked about the greenhouse and the classroom roof. She said my father would have loved it. Dad had died the winter before I drew the first plan. Mentioning him opened a door in me. Mom knew which doors still opened. The grant required a new project committee. Evan insisted on written roles. Rosa represented the neighborhood. I remained designer and site lead. Mom represented the fiscal sponsor. A library staff member named Claire Mills joined as education partner. We met once a month. On paper, the structure was clear. In practice, Mom began scheduling separate donor meetings without us. She called them development conversations. She did not share minutes because she said no decisions were made. Then vendors began calling her instead of me. A greenhouse company sent revised dimensions I had never approved. A sign maker asked me to confirm a logo placement. The proof showed the Civic Circle emblem at the top. Linden Street Community Garden was underneath in smaller letters. My name was gone. I rejected the proof. The sign maker apologized and said Patricia had already approved it. I forwarded the city agreement and asked him to hold production. Mom called within 10 minutes. "You embarrassed me in front of a vendor," she said. I said the vendor had been given an unauthorized design. She said the charity was paying. I reminded her the grant was public money and the garden committee controlled site decisions. She accused me of hiding behind paperwork. I almost laughed. Paperwork was the reason her charity had any authority at all. Instead, I asked her to attend an emergency committee meeting. She arrived 20 minutes late. She brought a folder of donor pledges and placed it in the center of the table like a weapon. "Every person in this folder gave because I asked," she said. Rosa replied, "They gave for the garden." Mom looked at her with a thin smile. "That distinction is easy to make when you are not responsible for meeting the budget." I said the budget did not purchase authorship. Mom said nobody was discussing authorship except me. The committee voted on the sign. 4 people supported the original name. Mom abstained. The minutes recorded that the city-owned entrance sign would read Linden Street Community Garden. Below it, a smaller line would list the Civic Circle as fiscal sponsor. The project team would be credited on an interior panel near the teaching area. I thought that settled the issue. Mom signed the minutes. Then she asked me to stay after everyone left. "You humiliated me," she said. I asked how a vote could humiliate her. "You made me look controlling." I did not answer. She gathered her folder slowly. "Donors do not like disorder. If they think the project is fighting itself, they leave." There it was again. Any resistance from me became a threat to the garden. She reached for her coat. "You may win every little vote, Nicole. Just be sure there is still something left to fund." Nearly 2 years passed while the permanent work moved from plans to concrete. The greenhouse foundation went in, the accessible beds took shape, and Mom followed the committee rules whenever someone was watching. By then, I had spent almost 7 years on Linden Street. I thought the worst fight was behind us. The calm ended with a photograph. Claire texted it to me on a Sunday morning. She had attended a Civic Circle brunch at the country club. On the wall behind the podium was a rendering of our garden. A gold banner crossed the top. "The Patricia Mercer Garden Legacy Project." Under it, smaller words announced a spring dedication. I zoomed in until the image became grainy. My design was there. My name was not. I called Mom, and she answered on the second ring and sounded cheerful. I asked what the legacy project was. She said it was a donor campaign for the final phase. I asked why it carried her name. She said the campaign needed a recognizable face. "It is not the garden's legal name," she added. That phrase told me she had already tested the distinction. I asked whether the city had approved it. She said private donors did not need the city's permission to honor someone. I drove to her house. The original plan was in my trunk. I had started carrying it again. Mom opened the door in slippers and an expensive cream sweater. She led me into the dining room. Stacks of pledge cards covered the table. Each card showed a photograph of the garden and the words Patricia Mercer Garden Legacy Project. At the bottom, donors could choose benches, trees, or engraved bricks. My mother had turned my design into a naming campaign without telling the committee. "You said the legal name stays the same," I said. Mom poured coffee as if we were discussing curtains. "It will." I picked up a card. "Then why does every donor think this is your garden?" She set down the pot. "Because I have spent 6 years asking people for money while you spent 6 years criticizing my wording." I said I had spent those years designing and building the place. She replied, "And who made sure you could?" I asked her to stop the campaign. She said $40,000 had already been pledged. Some donors expected recognition at the dedication. I said the committee had never approved a dedication. Mom smiled without warmth. "The city is planning one because the construction is ending." She had known for weeks. I had not. She said Evan assumed I was informed. That was how she worked now. She used my relationship with everyone else as the gap where her decisions could hide. I called Evan from my car. He sounded genuinely confused. Patricia had told him I was overwhelmed at work and wanted her to handle event planning. I had never said that. He emailed me the chain. In it, Mom wrote, "Nicole prefers to stay behind the scenes. Public recognition makes her uncomfortable." She had turned every time I avoided a fight into proof that I did not want credit. My silence had become a document she could use. Evan asked if I wanted the city to stop the dedication. I said not yet. Construction crews were scheduled. Donors had booked travel. The neighborhood had been promised an opening day. I hated how quickly I began protecting everyone else from the consequence of my mother's choices. Evan heard it too. "You are allowed to let this be inconvenient," he said. I told him I needed one day. He gave me until Monday afternoon. That night, I unrolled the first plan on my living room floor. The paper had small tears along one edge. Green pencil marked the paths and beds. In the margin, under my mother's initials, were the words she had written years earlier. "Nicole remains project designer and community lead." I touched the sentence. It felt both powerful and childish. A promise mattered only when the person who made it still believed your memory counted. I searched my old emails. There were hundreds. Mom asking me for a project description. Mom requesting my design notes. Mom praising the beautiful language in a grant paragraph. Mom telling Evan that Nicole's plan is the backbone of this effort. The truth was everywhere. It was not hidden. It had simply been scattered across years while her public version grew cleaner and louder. I created a timeline on my laptop. I did not call it evidence. Not yet. Monday morning, I met Rosa at the garden. She was tying young raspberry canes to a wire. I showed her the donor card. She read it twice. Then she sat on the edge of a raised bed. "Your mother always wanted a monument," she said. I asked why she had never told me. Rosa shook her head. "I thought you knew." According to her, Mom had asked volunteers months earlier whether they would support naming the teaching pavilion after Patricia. I called an emergency committee meeting for that evening. Mom declined. She said she had a donor dinner. The rest of us met in the library. Claire brought printed campaign materials. Evan joined by video, and we reviewed the city agreement and the grant rules. The city controlled the official name and signs. The Civic Circle could not promise naming rights. It also could not represent private donations as part of the public grant without reporting them. The problem was serious but simple. Mom had promised more than she could give. If the committee rejected her campaign, donors might ask for money back. If we accepted it, the false story would become permanent. I proposed a written correction to every donor. The garden would keep its name. Patricia could be thanked as fiscal sponsor. All project credits would be accurate. Claire supported me. Rosa did too. The vote was unanimous among those present. I sent Mom the resolution. She called at 11 that night. "You held a vote without me." I said she had declined the meeting. "Because I was raising money for your project." I corrected her, our project. She went quiet. Then she said, "Do you have any idea what people will think if I send this correction?" I said they might think she made a mistake. "No," she answered. "They will think my own daughter is trying to disgrace me." I said the correction did not mention our relationship. Mom laughed bitterly. "Everything you do mentions our relationship." She reminded me that she had helped with college tuition after Dad's scholarship fund ran short. She reminded me that she had introduced me to my first internship. She reminded me of every Christmas dinner, every loaned car, and every casserole. The list was not random. It was her definition of motherhood as permanent ownership. I let her finish. Then I said, "None of that gave you my signature." She asked what signature had to do with anything. I told her every donor card used my design. Every rendering came from files I had created. Every promise depended on committee approval she did not have. "You are making this legal now?" she asked. I said no. She had made it public. I was only refusing to let public become permanent. Mom did not send the correction. Instead, she sent a different email to the committee. It said I had become emotionally overwhelmed and needed a temporary leave from project duties. She thanked me for my years of service. She copied the Civic Circle board, 3 city employees, and the construction manager. I read it at my desk before sunrise. For several seconds, I could not breathe. She had not argued with me. She had announced my disappearance. I replied to everyone. My response was 6 sentences. I had not requested leave. I remained the city-recognized project lead. The committee vote stood. No donor naming promises had been approved. All site decisions required committee review. I asked Evan to confirm. He did within 10 minutes. The construction manager did too. Mom's assistant then canceled my access to the shared donor folder. By noon, my key card for the Civic Circle office no longer worked. I had used that office for grant records for 4 years. My project email redirected to Mom's assistant. A vendor called to ask whether I had resigned. The lie was no longer soft. It had consequences. I drove to the garden and found a new padlock on the tool shed. My key did not fit. Rosa was inside the fence. She came to the gate and saw my face. She changed it this morning, she said. Mom had told volunteers the lock upgrade was required by insurance. Rosa had watched her hand keys to 2 board members. I stood outside a garden I had designed while my mother's charity controlled the gate. That image finally did what years of wording could not. It made compromise feel ridiculous. Evan arrived 20 minutes later. The city owned the shed and had not approved a lock change. He cut the padlock with a bolt cutter from his truck. He did not make a speech. He simply handed me a new city key and said, "This one cannot be canceled by your mother." Relief hit me so hard that I cried. Not for long, just enough to admit that the situation had moved beyond family tension. Inside the shed, my project boxes had been moved. One was missing. It contained volunteer waivers, early meeting notes, and printed copies of the first grant. The original plan was safe at home, but the missing records mattered. I called Mom. She said the Civic Circle had taken its property for audit. I asked for an inventory. She refused. "You are not entitled to every paper that passes through my office," she said. I reminded her that some papers belonged to the city and volunteers. She said her attorney would respond. That was the first time either of us used the word attorney, and I did not have one. I also did not want one. I wanted my mother to stop. There is a humiliating stage in family conflict when you keep waiting for the person who caused it to become embarrassed enough to repair it. Patricia was not embarrassed. She was cornered. Cornered people reveal priorities. Mom's priority was not the garden. It was preserving the story that she had created it. The donor campaign had become her chance at a regional civic award. Claire found the nomination online. The application described Patricia as the visionary founder who transformed a neglected lot into a model of urban renewal. It quoted my grant language. It included a photograph of my first plan cropped just above my name. That crop changed me. She had not overlooked my credit. Someone had deliberately removed it. I printed the image and placed it beside the original plan. The cut line passed through the lower title block. My mother had once said nobody took attendance on verbs. Now she was editing nouns. Founder, designer, daughter. Her version had room for only one of them, and she had chosen the one that put her at the center. I met with a local attorney named Dana Cole. She specialized in nonprofit governance, but she explained the situation in plain language. The Civic Circle could manage money because the city agreement allowed it. That did not let the charity invent naming rights or remove the appointed project lead. The grant application, meeting minutes, and city records were strong. The cropped plan could show misrepresentation, but intent would be harder to prove. Dana asked what outcome I wanted. I said I wanted the garden protected, the donor promises corrected, and the public record made accurate. She asked whether I wanted money. I said no. She asked whether I wanted my mother punished. I said no again. Then she leaned forward. "Do you want your relationship with her protected from the truth?" I could not answer. That was the only thing I still wanted and knew I could not have. We sent one letter. It was not a lawsuit. It asked the Civic Circle to restore my access, return shared records, stop using unauthorized naming language, and correct the award application. It gave them 5 business days. Dana copied the city. I signed the letter at her conference table. My hand shook after the pen left the page. Signing felt disloyal. That feeling told me how long my mother had trained me to confuse obedience with love. Mom came to my house that evening. She did not call first. I opened the door but did not invite her in. She held Dana's letter folded into thirds. "You hired a lawyer against your mother?" I said I hired someone to explain an agreement. She lifted the pages. "This is a threat." I said the changed locks were a threat. The false leave notice was a threat. The donor campaign was a threat to the garden. She looked past me into my living room. The green pencil plan was spread across the dining table. Her face tightened. "You keep that old thing like a weapon." I turned toward it. "I kept it because it was the beginning." She said beginnings were sentimental. Institutions survived because people like her made hard decisions. I asked whether cropping my name was a hard decision. She did not deny it. Mom folded the letter again. "Do you know what this project has cost me?" she asked. I thought she meant money. She meant status. For years, she had been the dependable woman behind other people's celebrations. The garden was the first thing large enough to carry her name beyond one banquet season. She said that after Dad died, people stopped asking what she was building. They asked whether she was managing. I understood the ache beneath that sentence. It did not excuse what she had done. "You wanted a legacy," I said. "So did you," she replied. I told her my legacy was the work, not a monument. She shook her head. "That is easy to say when your career already has your name on it." Then, she said the thing that explained everything. "I gave you the life that made you capable of drawing that plan." There it was. In her mind, my talent was a family asset. My degree, my labor, and my patience were returns on her investment. She did not believe she was stealing. She believed she was collecting. I told her raising me did not make my work hers. Her mouth opened, then closed. The hurt on her face was real. So was the entitlement behind it. 2 truths can occupy the same room. Only one can decide the boundary. Mom left without agreeing to anything. The next morning, the Civic Circle board restored my email access. The missing box returned to the garden. The donor correction did not go out. Instead, the board requested mediation. Dana advised me to attend. We met in a neutral conference room at City Hall. Mom brought 2 board members. I brought the original plan, the city agreement, and Rosa. The mediator asked each side to summarize the conflict. Mom spoke first. She said the garden had suffered from confusion around recognition. She described me as a gifted professional who struggled with collaborative credit. She said the Civic Circle had raised nearly all the money and deserved a visible legacy. Every sentence was polished. None mentioned the cropped plan, changed lock, or false leave notice. When it was my turn, I unrolled the plan. I pointed to the date, my name, and my mother's initials. Then I showed the city agreement and the committee minutes. I explained the donor campaign in one sentence. My mother promised public naming, rights that the committee never offered, then tried to remove me when I objected. The room became very still. Clear language often sounds harsh only because manipulation depends on fog. The mediator proposed a compromise. The garden would keep its official name. The teaching pavilion could be named after the Civic Circle, not Patricia. Donors would receive a correction. The award application would list Mom as fundraising chair and me as founder and designer. My access would remain. I accepted. Rosa accepted. The board members accepted. Mom asked for a private break. She and I stood near a window overlooking the parking lot. "You are willing to put founder beside your name, but not mine," she said. I reminded her that she had not founded it. I signed the first agreement. I said she signed after the plan, the volunteers, and the city proposal existed. She looked at me as if chronology were a personal attack. "Nobody will remember those details," she said. "That is why you keep changing them," I answered. She turned away. When we returned to the room, she rejected the compromise. The mediation ended. The Civic Circle Board had to choose whether to defend her version or protect the organization. They postponed the decision. The dedication remained on the city calendar. It was 6 weeks away. That deadline changed the conflict. Construction was nearly complete. The city needed an operator for the new greenhouse and teaching pavilion. If the Civic Circle could not follow the agreement, another nonprofit could step in. Evans suggested creating a neighborhood cooperative. The city could not promise approval, but it could review the transfer. Rosa said the volunteers would support it. I hesitated. Moving the agreement would protect the garden. It would also remove the last reason my mother and I had to speak. For years, our relationship had survived inside project meetings, vendor calls, and shared deadlines. Without the garden, there might be nothing left but the truth. I told Evan I needed time. He said the city needed documents within 2 weeks. One deadline, one decision, no more editing. I spent 3 days doing nothing. I went to work. I answered client emails. I ate cereal for dinner. Every night, the first plan waited on my table. I kept thinking about the line in its margin. Nicole remains project designer and community lead. My mother had written it when the garden was too small to threaten her. Now the same sentence could cost her the role she valued most. Claire came over on Thursday with soup and a stack of volunteer statements. People had written what they remembered. Rosa described the first cleanup. Mr. Webb described the accessibility revisions. A teacher included photographs of me teaching children to measure planting rows. None of it was dramatic. That was why it mattered. The garden had not appeared because one woman had a vision. It had been built through hundreds of ordinary acts. Claire asked what I was afraid of. I said I was afraid Mom would lose everything. She corrected me. She may lose control of one project. I said the Civic Circle was her identity. Claire shook her head. Then she should not have used it to erase yours. I knew that. I still needed someone else to say it. Family pressure works best when it makes proportion impossible to see. The next morning, I signed the cooperative papers. We called it Linden Neighbors Garden Association. Rosa became vice president. Claire agreed to handle education. I agreed to serve as site director for 1 year. We submitted the application to the city with volunteer signatures and a simple operating budget. I did not tell Mom. The process was confidential until the review meeting. The city review took 10 days. Evan interviewed committee members and checked the grant records. The Civic Circle Board provided its files. Mom submitted a written statement claiming the conflict was a family misunderstanding. She also attached the dedication program. On the cover was a watercolor rendering of the garden. Inside, the main event was listed as the naming of the Patricia Mercer Community Garden. The program did more than repeat the donor campaign. It changed the official name without approval. It listed Patricia as founder. It described me as landscape consultant and daughter of the honoree. 7 years of work had been reduced to a service and a relationship. At the bottom of the page, I was scheduled to give the dedication speech. Mom had assigned me the job of confirming her version. Evan asked whether I had agreed to speak. I had not. He offered to remove me from the program. I surprised both of us by saying no, I would speak. I did not yet know what I would say. I only knew I would not let my empty place at the podium become another form of consent. The city released its decision 3 days later. The result was not dramatic, it was administrative. The Civic Circle had violated the committee process and made unauthorized naming promises. The city would transfer project operations to the neighborhood association after the dedication. Donor funds restricted to the garden would move with the project, subject to normal accounting. The Civic Circle would remain credited for its years of fiscal support. Mom would not be named founder. She would not control the greenhouse. The city also required a corrected public record at the dedication because false programs had already been mailed. Evan asked whether I wanted him to make the announcement. I said I would do it. He warned me that Patricia might interrupt. I told him she had been interrupting my authorship for years. I could survive one afternoon. Dana helped me write a statement. The first version sounded like a legal notice. The second sounded angry. The third sounded afraid. I threw all three away. Then I took out the green pencil plan. I read the notes along the edges: taller beds, herbs by the sidewalk, shade near the library wall. Every line carried someone's need. That gave me the right tone. The garden did not need a winner, it needed an accurate story. My final speech was 2 pages. It thanked the Civic Circle for handling money and insurance. It thanked the city, the library, and the volunteers. It named Rosa and the first cleanup. It explained who drew the plan and who revised it. It corrected the garden's official name. It announced the new neighborhood operator. It did not call my mother a thief. Facts were enough. On the Monday before the dedication, Mom asked me to meet at the garden. I arrived after work. The new greenhouse windows reflected the evening sun. She stood by the entrance with 2 workers and a wooden crate. One worker removed the approved Linden Street sign. The other lifted a heavy brass plaque from the crate. I saw her name before the metal reached the wall. The Patricia Mercer Community Garden, I read. Mom gave the workers a quick nod. Then she handed me a folded speech. It thanked her for seeing possibility where others saw weeds. It called her the founder, and it included one sentence about me. My daughter Nicole contributed her professional talents to my vision. I looked at the workers bolting the plaque over the mounting holes where the proper sign had been. Mom tapped the pages against my wrist. Try not to make this about you, Nicole. The sentence was almost gentle. Which made the demand feel even colder. I asked whether the city had approved the plaque. She said the donor committee had. There was no donor committee. She meant herself and 2 friends from the Civic Circle board. I told the workers to stop. They looked at Mom. She said, "Finish it." I called Evan. He was 15 minutes away. Mom crossed her arms. "You are really going to make a scene over a temporary sign?" I looked at the half-mounted plaque. "You ordered bronze." She said donors expected it. I asked whether she had told them about the city decision. Her expression changed. She did not know the review was complete. The city had sent the notice to the Civic Circle office that afternoon. Her assistant had not reached her. I told her operations would transfer after the dedication. She stared at me. Then she looked toward the workers as if they had witnessed something private. "You took my organization's project," she said. I answered, "The city returned the neighborhood's project." Mom stepped closer. "After everything I did for you," I held out her speech. "This is not for me." She refused to take it. She said the transfer would humiliate her in front of every donor she had brought. I said the false plaque would humiliate everyone who had built the garden. "They do not care whose name is on it," she snapped. "Then why do you?" I asked. Evan arrived with a city maintenance supervisor. He examined the plaque and told the workers to remove it. Mom tried to argue. The supervisor showed her the approved sign order. The workers loosened the bolts they had just tightened. Brass came away from brick. 4 pale holes remained. Mom watched her name return to the crate. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired enough to become honest. "I will be at the dedication," I told her. "I will give a speech. It will not be this one." She asked what I planned to say. I said the truth. Her face went still. "If you embarrass me publicly, there is no coming back from it." I looked at the empty mounting holes. "You already decided that when you ordered the plaque." She left without saying goodbye. The next 3 days were quiet. That worried me more than another argument. The Civic Circle Board issued a brief statement supporting the city's transition. 2 members resigned. One called to apologize for approving donor materials without reading the agreement. Mom did not call. I heard through Claire that she was still attending the ceremony. She had asked to review the final program. The city declined. Saturday arrived warm and windy. More than 200 people gathered outside the garden. Folding chairs faced a small platform near the teaching pavilion. Children held paper flowers made at the library. Donors sat in the front rows. Volunteers stood along the fence. The correct Linden Street sign had been remounted at the gate, but the interior credit panel remained covered with a green cloth. I carried the first plan in its worn cardboard tube. My 2-page statement was in my jacket pocket. Rosa squeezed my hand before I walked toward the platform. Evan stood beside the microphone. Claire managed the children near the ribbon. My mother sat in the center of the first row, wearing a pale blue suit. She had placed a copy of her rejected speech on her lap. The mayor spoke first. He praised the neighborhood and thanked the civic circle. Evan explained the city's support. Then he introduced Patricia as the longtime fundraising sponsor. Mom walked to the microphone before he finished. She smiled at the crowd and began speaking from memory. 7 years ago, I looked at an abandoned lot and imagined a place where dignity could grow. My sentence, again, this time I did not push a wheelbarrow past it. I stood at the side of the platform and listened. Mom described early doubts, donor meetings, and construction problems. She said we when the work sounded difficult. She said I when the results sounded beautiful. Then she turned toward me. My daughter contributed her design skills, and today she will tell you what my vision has meant to her. People applauded. Mom stepped away from the microphone and handed me the rejected speech in full view of the crowd. She had printed a fresh copy. Her smile told me she still believed the old pressure would work. Donors were watching. The city was watching. She expected me to protect her from the truth, because she had made the truth inconvenient. I took the pages, then I set them face down on the podium. My mother is right about one thing, I began. This garden means a great deal to me. Mom relaxed slightly. I continued. It means too much to let its history be rewritten. The wind lifted one corner of her speech. I placed the cardboard tube over it. The crowd went quiet. I thanked the Civic Circle for processing donations and carrying insurance. I thanked the city and library. Then I named Rosa. I described the rainy afternoon when we filled 3 trash bags. Rosa covered her mouth. I named the first volunteers, the teenagers who wanted a mural, and Mr. Webb, who asked for taller beds. The story became crowded with the people Mom's version had removed. Then I opened the tube. I unrolled the green pencil plan across the podium. Evan helped hold one corner. The paper was too large, so part of it hung toward the audience. I pointed to the date. This was drawn before the Civic Circle joined the project. I pointed to the title block. It was submitted to the city under my name. Then I pointed to the lower margin. My mother signed this promise. Nicole remains project designer and community lead. I read the words slowly. Mom stood. This is not the place for a family dispute, she said. Her voice carried without a microphone. I looked at her. You made it public when you mailed programs with a false founder. A murmur moved through the chairs. Mom stepped toward the platform. I raised the money, she said. I answered, you raised money for a project that already existed. She said the garden would have failed without her. I agreed. That surprised her. Your work mattered, I said. It still does. But support is not authorship, and motherhood is not ownership. Her face tightened. Everything you are came through this family. The words were sharp now. They held the whole argument. I felt the old shame rise. Then I saw the volunteers behind her. I saw children standing beside beds they had painted. I placed both hands on the plan. You helped raise me, I said. You did not earn the right to replace me. Mom reached for the plan. I rolled it back before she could touch it. Then I removed my own statement from my pocket. I announced that the city had completed its review. The garden would keep the name chosen at the first neighborhood meeting. Its new operator would be the Linden Neighbors Garden Association. The civic circle would be credited for fiscal support, but no individual would receive ownership of the project. Mom turned toward Evan. "You approved this ambush?" He said the written decision had been delivered to her office. She accused me of using city rules to steal her legacy. I looked at the covered panel inside the gate. "A legacy can include the truth," I said. Then I signed the operating agreement on the podium. That signature ended the civic circle's control. It also ended my ability to retreat into another compromise. Evan handed me the ribbon scissors. I asked Rosa and 3 children to join me. Mom remained beside the front row. For one painful second, I considered asking her too. Then I remembered the speech on the podium. Invitation without accountability would only restart the old story. We cut the ribbon together. The gate opened. People moved into the garden. Claire pulled the green cloth from the interior panel. It read, "Linden Street Community Garden, designed with the neighborhood by Nicole Mercer." Beneath that line were the names of the first volunteers, the library, the city, and the Mercer Civic Circle. My mother's work was present. It was accurate. Mine was present too. Nothing had to be stolen for both to exist. Mom stared at the panel. Then she picked up her speech and walked toward the parking lot. No one blocked her. I did not follow. That was the visible consequence I had feared for years. The ceremony continued without Patricia at its center. The garden did not collapse. The donors did not riot. Children ran toward the strawberry beds. Ordinary life exposed how much power I had given her threat. The Civic Circle transferred the garden funds the following week. Every donor received a correction. Most left their gifts in place. 2 requested refunds, and the association returned them. The Regional Award Committee withdrew Mom's nomination after receiving the corrected record. She remained director of her charity, but the board adopted new approval rules. The world did not end. It only became less convenient for her. My mother did not speak to me for 3 months. Then a plain envelope arrived. Inside was the cropped photograph of my plan from the award application. The missing lower section had been taped back on. My name was visible again. There was no grand apology. On a small card, she wrote, "I knew whose work it was. I was afraid no one would remember mine." I read the sentence many times. It was the closest she had come to telling the truth. I wrote back that fear explained her actions, but did not repair them. I said I was open to a private conversation after she corrected the same story with the donors and board members she had misled. I did not offer access to the garden. I did not promise forgiveness. A door can remain unlocked without being left wide open. She made the corrections. Slowly, some were written, 2 were spoken at Civic Circle meetings. Months later, we met for coffee. She apologized without explaining it away. I listened. We are not close in the old way. The old way required me to become smaller whenever she felt unseen. What we have now is limited, careful, and honest enough to grow. The first plan hangs inside the garden tool shed today. I placed it behind clear glass, green pencil, and softened corners included. Children use it during design workshops. They compare the drawing with the paths outside and find all the changes the neighborhood made. Near the bottom, they can still see my mother's initials beside her promise. I used to think those initials proved she had broken her word. Now they remind me of something else. A name is not important because it feeds pride. It is important because it carries responsibility. When people erase your name, they often erase what they owe you too. Putting it back is not revenge. Sometimes it is the most accurate form of peace. The garden still belongs to the neighborhood. That was always the point. Every spring, Rosa plants herbs near the sidewalk. Mr. Webb's tall beds are still in use. The brass plaque with my mother's name never returned. The only thing mounted over the gate is the original name, plain and readable. Linden Street Community Garden. What would you have done at that podium? Would you have read the family speech, walked away, or corrected the record? Whatever your answer, remember this. Gratitude does not require disappearance. Love can ask for grace. It cannot demand your erasure.